Hello there, you lucky devils. Before I start, we'll remind you, click the link in the description of this video. It will take you to the Rumble channel. I uploaded yesterday an episode about, I took scenes from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the original British miniseries, and I cut them in the proper chronological order. A few of them, because we're going to, after this episode, real soon after this episode, because of stuff that came out to JFK documents, okay? You need to know all that stuff about the fictional Alexei Polyakov, and you're going to see stunning similarities with the real-life Dmitri Polyakov. And you also need to see tonight's episode and the next episode about the company, because it's bringing us right straight around back to JFK. So let me get started here.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
You're in violation of secure communication procedures, Commodore.
So we just went ahead and fixed the glitch.
There is no America. There is no democracy.
Our fifth objective, a new world order.
There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no
Vast
West.
right-wing conspiracy.
What do you call it when the assassins accuse the assassin?
A new world order.
Thank you for plugging in to the Stones Unturned podcast.
Well, just a second there, Professor. We fixed the glitch.
I'm your host, Professor Thomas Henry Horan.
He reads everything.
Hello there, my beautiful, bountiful, bodacious boosters. You better bet your bottom bippy he reads everything. So once again, click the link in the description of this video. It will take you to the Rumble channel where you can see the episode. I can't do this on YouTube. I'll get kicked off YouTube. I took clips from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy because John LeCarre knew all about the real-life Dmitri Polyakov, and that's going to matter a lot when we come back to JFK. And speaking of JFK, what does that have to do with the company? Let us dive right in. One more time, repeat after me. The company operates the global economy. They don't own the whole thing, but they operate it. Going back to the original Fertile Crescent, and then you have the Sumerian Empire unites all of this. You have trade going back and forth. And then empires fall, empires rise, blah, blah, blah. The Egyptians conquer all this. And then eventually you have the Romans and the Greeks and the Persians and the fictional mythological kingdom of Israel and Aramaic language and the lost tribes and how they operate the global economy. Then what happens is, okay... So, but eventually the Romans will take over Ptolemaic Egypt. They'll take over most of the Parthian Empire. So Jerusalem's not so important anymore. So by 100 AD, even by 66 AD, Jerusalem's starting to lose its importance. And it's becoming more trouble than it's worth. But this happens, that happens, revolt is put down. 150 BC, we start to see this weird... The company is starting to call itself the Ecclesia, which becomes the Catholic Church. Ecclesia does not mean a place of worship. Ecclesia means the ruling class, or the like the communists would say, the party, because there's only one party in a communist country. So the party, the ruling elite, the distinguished ones. That's what Ecclesia means. The ones who are cut out, distinguished. Okay, forced to participate in government against their will because it was a high-risk job. That's not the point. So what becomes the church is the ecclesia. So they're the new Jews. Like the company's running into a problem recruiting new members because they have to get circumcised, and as an adult, that would be ask Walter Sobchak. Okay? So they come up with this new kind of Jew that becomes known as a Christian, even though that's not where the word Christian comes from. That's not my point. By the 3rd century AD, okay, not only is Byzantium becoming a place where the Romans are looking to move their capital, but silk weaving is becoming a much bigger industry. The Han Dynasty has united China, opened up the Silk Road. You have a lot of silk. Then you have people stealing mulberry seedlings and stealing silkworms and starting their own silk farms. So the Han Dynasty ends in 220 AD. But by this point, you have the Silk Road going all the way to the east coast of China. And now you have a lot of major trade. What's important about the Silk Road and what's important about the Spice Road that the Romans get access to by taking indirect control of Jerusalem and Amman down here to the Spice Road. By this time, the population's grown, the economy has grown, and these empires, what they really do, even though they may not really realize it, but what they really do is they keep the roads open. You no longer are limited to pass along trade where it goes through many, many hands. You now have merchant caravans going from one end of the world to the other, excluding the Americas, but it's close to a global economy. And you just add the Americas to it to finalize, in Australia, you have the global economy. It's almost a global economy at this point. And it will grow continuously into the global economy. Empires will come and go, but the global economy tries to maintain operation. And it's operated by these people that come to be called the Jews, even though they're not the Orthodox Jews that you think of, like the Maccabees and these ultra-Orthodox or the Hasidic Jews. They're really not like that. They're more like my ancestors, who become known as Sephardic Jews. Jewish and mystical and all that other stuff, okay? Because we've been all over the world. We operate the global economy for you. We own pieces of it, too. We're very good at providing financial services, legal services, okay? We hire navigators. We hire muscle. This is the company. So by 250, 280 AD, it's starting to hum pretty good. When you watch the movie Gladiator about the late Roman Empire, they had achieved the level of civilization that would not be seen again until the 17th century in Europe. Rome was getting into the 17th century, technologically, socially, politically, very sophisticated legal system, all of this stuff. But the ecclesia become the ruling party, not the old senatorial class, who have to stay in Rome. Between the Constantines, and it's not quite as clear-cut, they become the ruling party in Constantinopolis, Byzantium. And this is the main plug-in to the Silk Road. The Silk Road now comes into Europe through Constantinopolis, Byzantium. Okay? And the Spice Road comes into Europe more from Africa and Egypt. Not so much from the Holy Land anymore. They don't need them anymore. The Romans now have control of Egypt and Parthia, most of what used to be the Persian Empire, so they really don't need Jerusalem so much anymore, and they really don't care what happens to it. They actually kind of just obliterate it. It's obliterated in 130, 140 AD after the Bar Kokhba revolt. So now you have China, the Sassanid Empire, and you have the late Roman Empire. So you have this humming global economy, which is operated by Jews, basically. And more people are joining because now they've done away with this circumcision. Well, what about the covenant? Well, there's a new covenant. There's a new covenant, which is sealed with the blood of the Christ, or the Christos, as you prefer. Well, I'm not going to get into that tonight. But there's a new covenant you can join, and you don't have to get circumcised. So now the company can grow. The company can absorb more local people into the company. And the Silk Road is operated in the north. You might call it the northeast of the world. And the Spice Road is in the southwest. The southwest. Okay? Does that make sense? I'm going to whip through this. It's the Edict of Thessalonica in 380 AD, where the Roman Emperor Theodosius makes Nicene Christianity, Pauline Christianity, the empire's state party. The ecclesia is now going to be Nicene Christian, and they this is a rejection of a lot of these Eastern influences because the Eastern Church is much more mystical. It's much more Zoroastrian and dualistic and all this stuff. There's always going to be this schism between East and West, okay? Huns arrived on the river Volga by 370. The Chinese Buddhist monk Fa Shen travels on the Silk Road to reach India. Travel is opening up along these trade routes. It's a modern economy. So you get cultural exchange, you get all kinds of stuff. Books. There's beginning to be more common languages, more common alphabets because of these empires. Books are being traded. You name it. Ideas are being traded. Religions are being traded. Money is being traded. The Roman Empire is booming. It boomed so much it kind of blew itself apart around 400 AD. They're absorbing so many people, it becomes too multicultural, etc., etc., etc. So the silk industry migrates along the Silk Road. So the Byzantines, and even Eastern Europe, they have their own silk industry by the beginning of what we would call the Middle Ages, let's say 800, 900 AD, after the Dark Ages, after the so-called fall of Rome, which isn't really much of a fall in the East. Even the Muslim conquest at first is not. It's more of a civil war, and then the ultra-conservative Muslims, they take over, see? Right, and they kind of blow out their own brains. And then those people all flee west to the Western Arab Empire, North Africa, what was the Gothic Empire, North Africa, and Spain. We'll go over that in more detail when we come back to the Templars and the Freemasons. But this is, okay, so the Ecclesia have taken over the Silk Road. And in fact, okay, so very quickly, the barbarian, so-called barbarian, the Goths, the Gothic kings conquer the Western European Empire temporarily. Alaric the Visigoth and his cousins. Okay? Justinian in Constantinopolis, he's interesting. He's like a Henry Tudor. He's an outsider who becomes emperor. He's not a general. But he collects the legal code. He standardizes the legal code one last time in the Roman Empire. And in order to reconquer Western Europe and North Africa from the Visigoths, they've begun to employ huge numbers of Arab mercenaries, whole tribes of Arab mercenaries, who are required to convert. They convert to Nestorian Christianity. We've talked about this, and Muhammad was apparently a Nestorian Christian. Okay, this is in the mid-6th century AD. Then they're going to be invaded by the Franks and defeated, and then they're going to have to make a deal. The Ecclesia on its own, the Roman Ecclesia, will make a deal with the Frankish kings, particularly Merive and then Charles. Are you with me? And then that becomes Christendom. That becomes Frankish Roman Catholic Christendom by the 800s or so. Okay, I'm whipping through this fast. The details become clearer and clearer the closer to the present we get. Right? So Muhammad, who comes from, Muhammad's family are a major family in the company. They're major merchants. They're major merchants at the junction of the Spice Road and the Silk Road. You understand this, right? Muhammad comes from a major company family. And they are apparently Nestorian Christians. What in the West are going to be called Gnostic Christians. Okay, they don't believe, they're Unitarian. This is the birth of Unitarianism. Spoiler alert. Unitarian, I'll show you, communism and capitalism take the two branches, begin to separate right here. Right here, the Muslim conquest of the Holy Land and the second diaspora of the Jews, the Sephardic Jews being dispersed into Eastern Europe, Southeastern, in Turkey and places like this. Okay? So the Spice Road is taken over by the Islamic empires. The Silk Road remains open to the Christian West. The Tang dynasty after Muhammad, government records show the presence of Nestorian Jewish merchants in China. This is by the 700s. Once again, we see Christ triumphant, wearing the red cloak of the Caesars, wielding his cross kind of like a sword and kind of like a spear. Ego sum via veritas, right? What was Julius Caesar's motto? Veni Vidi Vici. VVV, that was his logo. This portrayal of Christ around 700 AD, ego sum via veritas vita. I am the way, the truth, and the life. But it's the VVV. He's wearing the red cloak of the Caesars, and he is king of the world. Is Christ the king? Christos Rex. Okay, the Chi-Rho might be an abbreviation just for Christos, but I think it's an abbreviation of Christos Rex because this was all about Christ the King, and the emperor is the vicar of Christ. He rules in place of the Christ. This is the whole idea of the Christian version of rule by divinely appointed kings. Okay, once again, here's Christ the King. The red cloak of the Caesars, blah, 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 blah. All right? And Constantine models himself. It's really his grandson who plays up this angle that Constantine was the second coming of Christ the King. Also sometimes known as Pantocrator. He's the king of the world. Now, what happens next? In the Middle Ages, the company along the Silk Road become the only legal contact between Christian Europe and the Silk Road had to come through Constantinopolis, because Christians were forbidden to do business with Muslims for a long time. So it had to come through, and this is the big Cathedral of Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom. I won't get into the whole was Jesus married thing. The company becomes known as the Drapers Guild because they deal in silks and wool and fur and leather. They become known as the Drapers Guild. You know all about the Knights Templar. You know all about the Freemasons. You never thought of the Drapers Guild, but this northeastern half of the company that goes along the Silk Road through Constantinopolis up into Europe across the Pannonian Plain, which is Hungary, Czechoslovakia, okay? They were the Drapers Guild. They built, if I'm not mistaken, they built the Cathedral of Hagia Sophia. And this becomes not only the first factories, right? The Industrial Revolution will be based on weaving. So from late Rome, especially in the East, to the Middle Ages, the Avar Khaganate centered in the Pannonian Basin, the Hungarian Plain. This area right here. And right here is Bratislava. This is the gateway into Northern and Western Europe, unless you want to come through Venice or you want to come through you know the name of this city, Florence. Is that Florence? That's not Florence. Is that Florence? I think that's Florence. Florence maintained quasi-illegal contacts with Africa and Egypt and the Spice Road. But Venice was 100% company town in the sense of being the Drapers Guild. Okay, so that's the sea route that comes down the Hellespont and so on and so forth. The land route, okay, goes on up through, ultimately it has to come through Bratislava. And we talked about that many, many, many episodes ago. First castrum built at Intercisa in the 2nd century, so about 150. The origin is to be put in the period after Trajan's Second Dacian War. So right after the fall of Jerusalem. They build a city here. And then right here, I think this is Bratislava. This is Bratislava right here. And this is their money. This is the Avar Khaganate. So what does this have to do with Napoleon? Well, what about the Drapers Guild in Corsica? The island was under Etruscan and Carthaginian influence until 237 BC, when it was taken over by the Roman Republic. The Etruscans were confined to a few coastal settlements such as Aleria, and the Carthaginians were strong on neighboring Sardinia. The Romans, however, had a profound influence, colonizing the entire coast, permeating inland and changing the unknown indigenous language to Latin. Corsica remained under Roman rule until its conquest by the Vandals in 430 AD. It was recovered by the Byzantine Empire in 534, adding a late ancient Greek influence. The Lombard supremacy on the island was short-lived. In 774, the Frankish king Charlemagne conquered Corsica with connivance from the Il Papa as he moved to subdue the Lombards and restore the Western Empire. For the next century and a half, the thus established Holy Roman Empire, this is the church as legal advisor, monopoly over the law schools, right? This is the church hiring the Frankish kings to try and reestablish the Roman Empire, but it turns out it's a semi-barbarian Catholic, Western Roman Catholic Christendom. Warred with the Saracens for control of the island. In 807, Charlemagne's constable Burkhard defeated an invading force from Al-Andalus. In 930, Berengar the Second king of Italy invaded and subdued the imperial forces. Otto I vanquished Berengar and restored Corsica to imperial control in 965. So in the southwest, these smugglers and pirates who are doing business, and Arabs who are doing business with the Arab North Africa and the Spice Road, they become the Knights Templar. And they become rivals to the Drapers Guild. In the year 958, a diploma granted by Berengar II of Italy gave full legal freedom to the city of Genoa. That's guaranteeing possession of its lands in the form of landed lordships. At the end of the 11th century, the municipality adopted a constitution at a meeting consisting of the city's trade associations, the companies, and the lords of the surrounding valleys and coasts. The new city-state was termed a company communist. The first communist company was formed in... Communism was not originally like Leninism. Communism was originally almost... Capitalism and communism were born out of the same nest, the company. The local organization remained politically and socially significant for centuries. As late as 1382, the members of the Grand Council were classified by both the company to which they belonged as well as by their political faction, noble versus popular. When we sail along the Corsica chestnuts, the Genovese authorities asked the Corsican farmers to plant a chestnut, an olive, a fig, and a mulberry tree every year. They start growing silkworms on Corsica. The know-how reached Italy. Silk manufacturing centers were established in Venice, Florence, Genoa, and Lucca, but also in the Genovese colony of Caffa on the Black Sea, where Genovese merchants traded with the Mongols. The demand was high and people made a good living, but Caffa fell to the Turks after 1453. Genoa had to look for raw silk closer to home. The trees are still here. There was an attempt to revitalize the silk industry in the early days of French rule. Napoleon's father was one of the initiators. Napoleon's father was in the Drapers Guild and invested in mulberry orchards and plantations. The Drapers Guild were major financiers of Chartres Cathedral. Well, the restoration after the fire. In the Middle Ages, a cloth merchant was one who owned or ran a cloth manufacturer and wholesale. They were all called mercers. They called themselves mercers, mercer. A cloth merchant might additionally own a number of draper shops. A number of Europe's leading banking dynasties, such as Medici and Berenberg, were built their original fortunes as cloth merchants. Before the Knights Templar take over the banking, muscle into the banking industry, it was the Drapers Guild, the company communists, who started the first banks, including but not limited to Medici and Berenberg, and Bardi, Denari, and probably Denari, because they come east. They come from the east, but not from the spice road. They come from, probably from the Silk Road. And the Drapers Guild, they just dominate the Middle Ages. Member of the Drapers Guild, Harry Truman. Edward Whalley, a regicide and cousin of Oliver Cromwell. George Williams, the founder of the YMCA, and John Woodard, geologist and physician to King Charles II. Anthony Philips van Leeuwenhoek was a Dutch microbiologist and microscopist in the golden age of Dutch science and technology. A largely self-taught man in science, he was also a member of the Drapers Guild. Even in merry old England, speaking of John Cabot, Giovanni Cabuto, the Worshipful Company of Drapers is one of the 111 livery companies of the City of London. The City of London is almost its own little kingdom. One of the historic Great 12 livery companies, and was founded during the Middle Ages. Organized as early as 1180, and the first Lord Mayor of London, Henry Fitzalwyn de Londonstone, was believed to have been a draper. The guild, this particular guild in London, was formally founded in 1361 and received a royal charter 3 years later. Incorporated as a company under a royal charter in 1438, and was the first corporation to be granted a coat of arms, just like a nobleman. This is the first time a corporation will be treated like a person. And as the company, the Drapers Company, the Worshipful Company of Drapers, is the first corporation to be granted a coat of arms just like any other nobleman. That's what the word incorporate means. All these assets incorporate one body, just like the body of the church, right? The acting charter of today is that granted by James I in 1607. Originally, the organization was a trade association of wool and cloth merchants. Oh, of course. Just harmless. It's just business is business. It has been one of the most powerful companies in London civic politics, especially the city where all the banks are. Over 100 Lord Mayors have been members of the company. The first progenitor of the Jarls of Arundel was a draper. During the plantation of Ulster, the company held land around Moneymore and Draperstown in County Londonderry. Amongst the royalty who had been members, 3 had not been expected to become a monarch at the time of their admission to the company, but were later crowned. Prince William of Orange in 1670, later King William of England, Scotland, France, and Ireland. Prince Karl of Denmark, later King Hakon VII of Norway. Prince Albert, Duke of York, later King George VI of Great Britain, Ireland, and Emperor of India, were not expected to become kings when they joined the Drapers Guild. Prince Frederick, Duke of York and Albany, Sir Francis Drake, Admiral the Viscount Nelson, the Marquis of Ripon, and Grinling Gibbons. Queen Elizabeth II was elected to the Court of Assistance in 2017 on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of her membership in the company. King Harold of Norway, King Charles III, the Duchess of Gloucester, Admiral the Lord Boyce, and Lady Victoria Latham, elected as the first female master of the company in 2012. This painting, this is a Rembrandt, and it is used on the Dutch master cigar boxes. This painting, he painted a lot of these groups, these civic organizations like the Lions Club, the Kiwanis, okay? This is the syndics of the Drapers Guild. They set wages, prices, and quotas for the entire textile industry, basically, by dominating the syndicate in, not Rotterdam, but in Holland. The Company, a short history of a revolutionary idea by John Micklethwaite and Adrian Wooldridge. These are the syndics of the Drapers Guild. They set wages, prices, and quotas. They are actually the first Federal Reserve Bank. Honestly, the syndics of the Drapers Guild. Back to the Company in Corsica. The Phoenicians have been there since 560 BC. Here's Marseille, here's Sardinia, and here's Corsica. In 1450, the Genoese Bank of St. George foreclosed on the island of Corsica. The Bank of St. George, also known as Casa, the House of the Company of God, and Bank of St. George. No, the Company of the Bank of St. George. The House of the Company of the Bank of St. George was founded in 1407 to consolidate the public debt, which had been escalating due to the war with Venice. The bank's primary mission was to facilitate the management of the San Giorgio shares, one of the oldest charter banks in Europe and the world. The bank's headquarters was the Palazzo San Giorgio, which was built in the 13th century by Guglielmo William Boccanegra, uncle of Simone Boccanegra, the first Doge of Genoa. In 1857, the ancient lock from the vault the lock was changed on the vault. Anyway, the leaders of the Terra offered the government of the island to the Company of the Bank of San Giorgio, a commercial corporation established in Genoa in the previous century. The bank soon fell foul of the barons and began a war of extermination against the barons. Does this sound familiar? Resistance broke in 1460, but Tommasino da Campofregoso, whose mother was a Corsican, revived the claims of his family and succeeded in mastering the interior of the island. 2 years later, Francisco Sforza, the Duke of Milan, overthrew the power of that family at Genoa and promptly proceeded to lay claim to Corsica. Blah, 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 blah. Exiled him to Sardinia. Twice he returned, and he was not finally expelled from the country until 1500. It was not until 1511 that the other barons were crushed, and the bank had established island-wide rule over Corsica, the bank. Here's the Palazzo San Giorgio. The palace also housed the prisons in which Marco Polo was held, having fallen prisoner of the Genoese during the Battle of Curzola. During the period of detention, which lasted almost a year, he dictated to his fellow prisoner, Rustichello de Pisa, his travel memoirs, which were later published as the Travels of Marco Polo. While he was being held prisoner in the Bank of St. George, are you with me? Marco Polo miraculously wrote this book that encouraged investment in attempts to reestablish trade. Well, the Silk Road, access to the Silk Road has been cut off by the defeat in the Crusades. Means we're cut off from the Silk Road because the Muslims take Constantinopolis. So now we have to go west to go east. All because of this complete garbage fiction propaganda book written by Marco Polo. Well, Pasquale de Paoli, and a lot of like Alcala, Rodrigo Alcala Bucor, Radi Alcala. The family, the dynasty was started by Pasquale Alcala Bucor, or Pasquale Bucor, or something like that. So it matters, okay? Pasquale de Paoli. For us, the people is the whole nation. Equality must not be an empty word. In 1755, Paoli returns to Corsica to take the head of the insurrection against the Genoese. So they ruled for like 200 years. Founding the first democratic state of the Europe of the Lights in 1755. He proclaims a constitution which stipulates in particular the sovereign people as the only legitimate source of power and the equality in front of the law. This is what America will be based on. The sovereignty of the people. During 14 years of government, Paoli will affirm the existence of a nation, mint a currency, create a fleet, raise an army, and found a university, just like America. Paoli's activities interested the American insurgents, fascinated Benjamin Franklin, as well as Jefferson, so much so that even today his bust remains on display in the house of the third President of the United States of America. Paoli led an intense social life and joined very close clubs, the Literary Club or the Royal Society. A Freemason, he was admitted in 1778 to the Lodge of the Nine Muses, visited Boswell in Scotland, and discovered England at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Beati Paoli is the name of a secret sect thought to have existed in medieval Sicily and possibly also in Malta. The sect is described by the author Luigi Natoli in his historic novel, I Beati Paoli, written as a series under the pseudonym William Galt in 1909, blah, 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 resembles an order of chivalry fighting for the poor and the commoners. Whereas the novel is fictitious, Sicily's history bears some evidence that the Beati Paoli existed. Feudalism, introduced in Sicily by the conqueror Roger de Hauteville. Remember, the Normans also conquered Sicily and Italy. The Normans, the Viking branch of the company. The Beati Paoli was allegedly formed to oppose both the church and the state, defending the communists from infringements opposed by the regime. What year is this? Shit. October 13th of what year? Swiss police said Thursday the wanted leader of the Order of the Solar Temple was among the 48 members of the Doomsday sect found dead in burned out buildings in Switzerland last week. Did I get this out of order? What cult are they? Okay, so what cult are they talking about? The Order of the Solar Temple, or simply Solar Temple, was a new religious movement and secret society often described as a cult. A Neo-Templar order. Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, and New Age ideas. Joseph de Mombro, with Luc Jouret as a spokesman and second in command, founded in 1984 in Geneva. Whatever. They're theosophists. So what does Napoleon have to do with all this? According to Boswell, no. According to I go on his show all the time. Todd Wood and you know who I'm talking about. Oh no. Who knows all about Napoleon. Napoleon may or may not have joined the Freemasons, but his brother was a Freemason, and as a matter of fact, Napoleon might have been a sock puppet for his brother. Joseph Bonaparte was admitted to Marseille's lodge, La Parfaite Sincérité, in 1793. He was asked by his brother Napoleon to monitor Freemasonry as Grand Master of the Grand Orient of France. He founded the Grand Lodge National of Spain. that lodge will overthrow Spanish rule in the Philippines, and then America will intervene. With Cambaceres, he encouraged the post-revolution rebirth of the Freemasonry order in France. Napoleon, whose father was in the Drapers Guild. This is Joseph Bonaparte, traveled to the United States on board the Commerce under the name of M. Bouchard. British naval officers had searched the vessel 3 times but never found Bonaparte on board. Bonaparte lived primarily in the United States, where he sold the jewels he'd taken from Spain. He first settled in New York City and Philadelphia, where his house became the center of activity for French migrants. In 1823, he was elected as a member to the American Philosophical Society. Later, he purchased an estate called Point Breeze, blah, 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 blah. So the American Philosophical Society, members from other countries, Alexander von Humboldt, the Marquis de Lafayette, Baron von Steuben, Thaddeus Kosciuszko, and Princess Dashkova. Founded as the Philosophical Society in 1743 by Benjamin Franklin, whose mother was a Folger. Napoleon sold Louisiana Territory to the United States in 1803. By the way, this was all known, a lot of this was known as the province of Quebec. Back in Corsica, Bonaparte grew up surrounded by Freemasons. His father and all 3 brothers were Freemasons. Napoleon's wife, Josephine, was initiated into a women's lodge in Strasbourg and held the position of Grand Master. Eugene de Beauharnais, the only son of Josephine from her first marriage, at the age of 24, having received the title of Viceroy of Italy from her stepfather, became the founder of the Grand Orient of Italy and the Supreme Council of Italy. But Napoleon was not a Freemason. Well, anyway, his Secretary of War, Minister of War, whatever, Antoine Fabre d'Olivet, was an occultist Hebraist who corresponded with Joseph Smith. He's a Neo-Pythagorean. He translated the Golden Verses. He was an occultist influenced by Eliphas Levi, a moderate revolutionary, a native speaker of Provençal, and a reformed Protestant. Provence is where the Cathar Rebellion was most deeply rooted. War Department, First Republic of Napoleon. First located Hyperborea at the North Pole. He was a hit songwriter. He was tutored on the nature of the soul by his dead fiancée, Julie Marcel, and wrote extensively on basic oneness of all major religions. Unitarianism. The great-grandmother of communism. French author, poet, and composer whose biblical and philosophical hermeneutics influenced many occultists such as Eliphas Levi, Gerard and Pappas, and Edouard Cheret. Research on the Hebrew language. Interest in Pythagoras, the Neo-Pythagoreans, hieroglyphics, Rosetta Stone. He was declared a non-person by Napoleon. There's no pleasing some people. Some people would bitch if you hung them with a new rope. His father, a businessman in the international silk industry. He wrote that he had written speeches designed. He was a propagandist. Survived both the French Revolution and the subsequent period of terror. Oh, that was handy. It's better to live on your feet than to die on your knees. I'm Professor Thomas Henry Horan, asking you to please stay plugged in to the Stones Unturned podcast.
He reads everything.
Better bet your bippies he reads everything. Okay, how was that, you magnificent so's and so's? Hi, Shane. Hi, Allard. Hi, Nathan. So I whipped through that stuff really fast. I just want to give you a basic idea of what I'm talking about later on. But the Pannonian Plain and those Jewish refugees who settled there in the Middle Ages, this is the birthplace of Unitarianism and the birthplace of communism. And the Jews who settle in the West and do business with the Muslims, that becomes the foundation of the Templars, which become the foundation of capitalism. But they grow out of the same thing. The Northeast will become communism, not necessarily Leninist, Stalinist communism. That becomes communism, and in the Southwest it becomes capitalism. But there will be another episode in a couple of days about all of that. In the meantime, please stay well. I need you to stay well. Take care of yourselves and each other. And as always, would you please, for everyone's sake, will you please spay and neuter your cannibals?